The first letter she wrote was in charcoal, her fingertips stained from the soot scraped off the side of the hearth. She had no ink, only paper torn from the back of an old hymnal, but her penmanship, trained in darkness and discipline, was steady. She did not mention her eyes, only her age, her faith, her willingness to work and keep to herself. Her name was Mercy Elwood, 23 years of silence pressed into her bones like frost into stone, and she sent the letter to a man who would never reply. 3 months passed with no word. Then a different man wrote back. His name was Thomas Lowry, and he claimed to own a cattle spread outside of Calico Bluff, New Mexico territory. He needed a woman who would not complain about the hard land or the loneliness. He'd read her letter through the postmaster's wire and thought her suitable. If she was willing, he would pay half her fare, and she could earn the rest in his kitchen. Mercy folded the letter and tucked it into her dress, beside the amulet her mother had sewn shut years ago. She had no family left. Her older brother drowned in the Missouri River. Her father hanged himself in a barn with the storm coming down so hard no one heard the rafters break. Her mother, a church-cleaning widow with a spine too rigid to bend, had died weeping blood from her lungs. Mercy stayed behind with the ashes and the cold silence that came after. She packed a bag with 2 dresses, her comb, the Book of Ruth, and a tin of rose pomade long gone to wax. She wore gloves with holes at the fingertips and walked to the depot with nothing but the name Lowry in her mind. The ride west was rough. Dust clogged her throat and the seats splintered her thighs. No one looked her in the eye. That suited her fine. She counted the passing of each day by the warmth of the sun on her lap and the chill that came when it left. In the dark of the nights, she prayed softly with her head against the window. She asked not for love or kindness, only a place where no one screamed. When she arrived at Calico Bluff, the station agent eyed her like a crow watching bread fall from a plate. "You're the girl from Missouri," he said. She nodded. "Lurry sent a boy for you. Mule cart broke 2 days east. Weather's been hell out there. You'll wait." Mercy waited on the bench beside the depot. 2 days turned to 4. No one came. On the 5th day, she asked a woman selling onions where she might find Thomas Lowry. The woman's mouth twisted. She pointed east with her chin. "You mean the one that married the half-Comanche girl? He's not looking for a wife. He's already got 2. The ache in Mercy's stomach turned sharp. She swallowed it like dry bread. That night she slept behind the saloon, rats twitching nearby. By morning she smelled of horse piss and sorrow. Still, she didn't cry. She tried working for the blacksmith, cleaning the buckets and boiling the lye rags. But he wouldn't let her stay after he caught her feeling along the hearth too carefully. "You're blind," he said, "or close enough to it, you'll lose a hand." She didn't argue, she simply left. The desert had its own way of peeling a person down. Skin cracked, tongue swelled, but she kept walking. From Calico Bluff to a clapboard church with no glass in the windows and a rusting bell atop its spine. She sat on the stoop until the preacher came out and asked her name. "Mercy," she said. He didn't ask more. She slept on the pews for a week, cleaned the splinters from the floor, helped the preacher's wife scrub pots until her knuckles split. But when she tripped carrying the offering bowl and the coins spilled across the aisle like bone dice, the woman hissed that the girl was cursed. "She sees with the devil's eyes," she spat, "or not at all." They sent her out in the rain. Her dress clung to her legs. She walked south, where the land burned hotter and the sky pressed down like a lid. She had 1 crust of bread left when she found the ranch gate. It wasn't marked. Just 2 posts leaning inward and a barbed wire fence trailing like a scar. A dog barked once, then silence. She followed the sound of the bell tied to a distant goat. Her boots sank into the soft dirt, and when she reached the corral, her throat tightened. A man stood at the post, one hand resting on the back of a roan mare. He wore no hat. His shirt was unbuttoned to the chest, the skin beneath sun-seared and white at the collar line. His beard was gray around the jaw, though his hair was dark. He watched her with the kind of quiet that didn't blink. She stopped a few paces away. "I'm not begging," she said, "only asking for water." The man studied her. "You're not from here." "No," she said. "You got family." "No." He took another look at her face, the way her eyes drifted, not quite focused, the way her chin lifted slightly too high. "You're blind. I can see shapes, sometimes light." He nodded once, walked past her. She heard a gate swing open and the slosh of a bucket. He returned, handed her the tin pail. She drank slow, lips pressed to the rim like it might vanish. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mercy Elwood." He didn't speak for a long while. Then, "You can stay in the loft if you don't mind dust." "I don't. I don't pay. I don't ask." That night she lay beneath a horse blanket, the smell of hay and leather around her like a second skin. She heard him below, tending the fire, a man who lived with silence as comfortably as she did. She didn't know his name, but something in his voice, in the steady weight of it, told her she'd found the edge of something that might hold. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was no longer loneliness. The rancher's name was Elias Cade. He told her on the third morning when she asked what to call him while she swept the porch. "Most folks just say Cade," he said, "or nothing at all." She repeated it once under her breath, rolled it over her tongue like a stone in a river. Cade. He rarely spoke, but when he did, it was plain and final. He showed her how to find the well by counting steps from the sycamore. He hammered a nail into the barn wall so she could hang her shawl without groping. He cut the lip of the chicken coop door so she wouldn't catch her skirt when she fed them, but he never watched her long, and he never touched her. Mercy learned to measure the ranch with her feet and ears. The goat bell meant the edge of the pasture. The crows meant spilled corn near the silo. The wind carried the sound of the windmill across the property, low and aching like a woman singing behind a closed door. She marked time by the heat of the dirt and the weight of the air in her lungs. She burned her hands once on the stove. He didn't scold her, just took her fingers gently in his and wrapped them in cooled waxcloth. The smell of tobacco lingered faintly on his shirt as he leaned close. "You're not a burden," he said. "Don't act like one." Mercy didn't cry then either, but something broke free in her chest, soft and strange as a thawed river. There were no servants, no hired men. Just the two of them, a barn full of stubborn animals, and land that cracked and groaned in the heat. Cade would leave at dawn with his rifle and return at dusk with game slung over his shoulder or blood dried on his boots. She never asked where he went. She only cleaned the gunpowder stink from his coat and scrubbed his shirts in the creek. In return, he taught her the names of the stars. At night, when she sat on the stoop with her hands in her lap, he'd point upward and say, "That's Orion's belt, that's the North Star, that one's dead. Light just hasn't caught up to us yet." She couldn't see them, not clearly, but she listened, and her mind filled in the shapes. Sometimes, after supper, they sat in silence while the wind moved across the plain. No sound but the creak of the porch and the soft whistle of Cade carving a piece of cedar. He worked the blade slow and smooth, and Mercy imagined his hands as steady as stone. In town, they whispered about him. A widow with a buried son, some said, a deserter from the war, a killer. But none of the stories matched his eyes, quiet, watchful, always drawn toward the edge of things. She only went to town once with him, 6 weeks after she'd arrived. He had to buy feed, and she asked to come, if only to feel different wind on her skin. On the way there, he said nothing, just handed her a handkerchief and nodded at her dress. In Calico Bluff, the stairs carved into her. She could feel them like briar along her ribs. One man muttered, "That Cade's new ghost," Another laughed and said, "Hell of a trade, horse for a blind whore." Mercy didn't flinch. She walked beside Cade like she couldn't hear. Inside the feed store, she ran her fingers along the canvas sacks, soft from flour dust. The shopkeeper, a boy too young to know shame, tried to place a hand on her shoulder when Cade wasn't looking. "She even know you ain't her husband," he whispered. She stepped away, but Cade saw. He didn't raise his voice, didn't even break stride, just took the boy by the collar and walked him back through the doorway, quiet and slow. Mercy only heard the thud, then the sound of someone choking on dirt. On the ride home, Cade said nothing, but when they passed the old split oak by the creek, he stopped the wagon. "Folks think broken means ruined," he said, "but that tree still stands." She nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Don't let them turn you into a ghost, Mercy." She didn't know what to say, so she said the only thing that felt true. "I won't if you don't." That night he carved a handle for her knife, etched her initials into the grip. She found it resting on the windowsill in the morning, polished and waiting. She wore it tucked into her apron from then on. Spring came late. A storm tore through the eastern ridge and left 2 cows dead from lightning. Cade buried them himself, then worked 3 days without sleep mending fence and hauling debris. Mercy sat up nights, listening to the thunder and the breath of the wind. She began to read the book of Ruth aloud again, not out of fear, but because her voice needed somewhere to go. "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay." One night, as she read those words, Cade stood in the doorway with blood on his hands and dirt on his knees. He didn't come in, didn't speak, just listened, then turned and walked back into the dark. She waited until the fire died. Only then did she sleep. There were others eventually. Drifters who came for water, ranch hands looking for work. One man knocked at dusk asking for Cade by name. Mercy didn't answer the door, but she listened. "You owe," the man said. "That debt don't vanish just 'cause you vanished." Cade's voice was flat. "I didn't vanish, I just stopped bleeding for you." The man left, but he left tracks. That night, Cade slept in the barn with his rifle near. Mercy didn't ask why. She only made coffee hotter than usual and left a slice of corn bread wrapped in cloth on the fence rail. In time, the scars on her hands faded. Her steps grew confident, her hearing sharper. She could tell when a stranger approached from the shift in the birdsong. She could hear Cade's breath change when he was near her, even if he said nothing. And he said nothing often, but his silence wasn't empty. It was full of something else, not pity, not fear, something steadier. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was no longer waiting. The fire started in the south pasture, where the grass ran dry as paper and the sun pressed down like judgment. Mercy smelled it first, smoke coiling sharp and oily in the wind. Cade burst through the door a breath later, hauling the Winchester from its rack. "Pack what you can, leave the rest." She didn't argue. She moved fast, hands steady, took only her knife, the Bible, a cloth sack with hardtack and dried apricots, and the amulet from her mother. Cade gave her the reins to the old gray mare, though she couldn't ride her alone. So he walked beside her, rifle in one hand, guiding them away from the dark plume crawling over the ridge. By nightfall, the flames had swallowed half the range. Cade's jaw was tight with grief, though he never named it. Mercy touched his wrist once as he watched the red glow pulse on the horizon. "It's land," she said, "not a soul." He didn't answer. They camped by the riverbed, the water low and silt heavy. He built a fire. She brewed coffee in a dented tin, the grounds thick enough to chew. In the dark, he said quietly, "I buried my wife under that ridge." Mercy didn't move. She bled out with the second child. Midwife was late. I sent for her, but the storm, his voice cracked. She died alone, so did the boy, never even took a breath. Mercy turned her face toward him, though she couldn't see him. Only the rhythm of his words, the breaks between them. "Did you love her?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "I loved what she gave me, the hope of it, the chance to be different." He drank, wiped his mouth with his sleeve. "After she passed, I went cold, harder than I should have, drove off men I needed, killed a man once who took a calf from my pen, thought he was taking more." Silence fell between them, heavy with the weight of shared absence. Mercy said, "You're not cold now." He glanced over, but she was already lying back, one hand under her cheek. "Not with you," he said, quiet enough she didn't reply. The next morning they returned to ash. Fences melted to wire. Half the barn gone. Cade worked without speaking, salvaging what he could, moving the cattle that had survived to the upper grazing patch. Mercy dug through the soot with her bare hands and found her shawl still smoldering on the nail by the barn wall. She buried it under a sycamore without a word. In the weeks after, the two of them became less like rancher and boarder and more like something forged under pressure. He taught her how to fire the rifle. She never missed a target, though she couldn't see the marks. She said she felt them. "You've got hunter's blood," he said once. She smiled faintly. "I've got nothing left to lose." He didn't argue, just handed her more rounds. One afternoon, two riders came from town, men in brown dusters with sheriff stars pinned crooked to their lapels. They wanted Cade to sign his land over in exchange for protection. Said a mining outfit was coming, and cattle didn't matter much anymore. Cade laughed once. Then he pointed to Mercy, standing at the porch with her knife. "You want to cross this fence, you'll bleed," he said. They didn't return that day. But trouble doesn't forget a slight. One night, Cade found a rope nailed to the door in the shape of a noose. The dog's throat was slit and left in the trough. No name was signed. Mercy took the knife from her apron and carved a mark into the porch beam, a small cross. Cade noticed but didn't ask. That night he slept with the rifle across his lap. She sat beside him until the wind turned cold. By mid-autumn the ranch was green again. The rains had come and the cattle thrived. But Mercy knew peace like she knew shadow. It never stayed. One morning, Cade didn't come back from the upper ridge. She waited past sundown. No sound of boots, no click of the gate, just wind. She followed the hoof tracks barefoot, her skirt tucked into her belt, the knife in one hand. It took her 2 hours, but she found him. Tied to a fence post, ribs cracked, one eye swollen shut. She untied him without a word. He sagged into her arms like a felled tree. "It was them," he whispered, "men from the mine." She hauled him across the saddle, tied his wrist to the pommel, and led the horse home by the reins. Her hands bled from the leather, but she didn't stop. She nursed him back over 10 days, cleaned the wounds, packed the bruises with vinegar and camphor. When he could stand, she pressed the rifle into his arms. He shook his head. "No, you don't get touched again on my account." She stepped closer, voice like a flame. "This isn't about you." Then she strapped the rifle to her back. She left before dawn. Took nothing but bullets in her blade. The dog's grave behind the barn still smelled faintly of iron. She walked into town in silence. They didn't expect her. The first man laughed. "You here for a handout, Batgirl." She slit his throat before he finished the last syllable. Swift, precise. The second reached for his gun. She shot him through the palm, then the gut, let him bleed in the dust while the town looked on. The sheriff stepped out last, his badge tarnished, his mouth wide. "Miss, you don't want this." She cocked the rifle. I already had it. Now I'm giving it back. She didn't miss a single shot. By dusk, 5 men were dead. The rest fled, boots slapping hard against the dry earth. Mercy stood in the middle of the street, smoke curling from her fingers. She dropped the rifle at the sheriff's feet. Tell them the land stays. Tell them Cade is not alone. Then she turned and walked the road home. It wasn't revenge. Not exactly. It was balance. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like someone surviving. She felt like someone who had chosen what would be left of her. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was beginning to look like something stronger. Winter laid its bones across the valley by mid-November, whitening the scrub hills and muting the sound of hoof and hammer. Mercy grew used to the weight of snow in her boots, the bitter taste of cold beans, the silence that lingered longer after blood had been spilled. Cade healed slow, ribs stayed tender. His eye never opened quite right again, but the pain sharpened him instead of softening him. He rose before dawn each day, not out of duty, but because Mercy did. They worked side by side now, not out of necessity, but because they both understood what came of turning your back too long. He never asked what she'd done in town, didn't need to. The next wagon from Calico Bluff carried feed, oil, and a letter from the sheriff with only 4 words scratched in crooked hand. "You've bought your piece." Cade burned it in the stove without a word. They spoke more now, not always aloud, but through the things they did for each other. He mended her boots before she asked. She learned to skin a deer fast enough to beat the frost. When she burned her thumb, he kissed the bandage. Not like a man to a woman, but like someone touching proof that another person bled. The space between them grew smaller. At night, they took to sharing the fire, no distance between chairs. Her fingers found his knee once, not on purpose, but she left them there. He didn't move. He told her about the war, the real one, not the stories, the cold mud of Virginia, the screams in the trees. How he watched a boy bleed out into a tin cup and didn't move fast enough to stop it. She didn't speak for a long while. Then she said, "I've heard that kind of screaming." He nodded. That was enough. One night the wind came hard off the ridge, loud enough to rattle the shutters. Mercy couldn't sleep. She sat up and pressed her palm against the window pane. Behind her, Cade stirred. "You see something?" he asked. She shook her head, just thinking about ghosts. He rose and came beside her. His hand rested on her back lightly. "You don't have to keep proving you're alive," he said. She turned toward him. Her face was pale from moonlight, her eyes fixed on something just past him. "I'm not," she said. "I'm proving I belong here." Then she leaned into him. His chest was warm. His breath smelled of pine and salt. He kissed her, slow, sure, as if he'd been waiting for permission since the first time she touched the porch rail. She didn't pull away. That night, she lay beside him in the small bed, listening to the storm in his ribs slow to something steady. He whispered her name once, not like a question, like a vow. When morning came, she woke first. She made coffee, folded his coat, fed the chickens by feel. Her hands remembered what her eyes never could. When Cade came out, she was sitting with the Book of Ruth in her lap. She asked, "Do you remember the story?" I remember she didn't run. She stayed, even after everything. He sat beside her, touched her wrist. "I want to marry you," he said, not a plea, a fact. She didn't speak for a long time. "I won't be a charity." "You're not. I won't give you children, not likely. I'm not asking for children. I'll grow old blind." He reached for her hands, held them gently, like reins on a skittish horse. I'll grow old scarred, we'll match. They married in the pasture with only the sky watching. Cade carved 2 rings from cedar and burned their names inside. Mercy couldn't see them, but she wore hers like armor. She took his name, but not his shadow. She stood beside him when the tax men came, when the new railroad line threatened to cut the western border. She negotiated with cattle buyers who called her miss until they saw her shoot. One day a woman from town came riding, dressed fine with polished boots and a face full of judgment. She asked for Cade, said she was kin to his first wife. Mercy didn't step back. She stood in the doorway, blade on her belt, hair tied back with rawhide. The woman sniffed. "You're the blind girl." Mercy tilted her head. "And you're the one who left her blood behind and came back for the land." The woman's mouth thinned. This place was meant for someone else. Mercy stepped down from the stoop, slow and sure. No, it was. It was meant for whoever stayed. She never returned. Winter deepened. Mercy planted lavender beside the fence line, said she liked the smell. Cade said it reminded him of his mother's quilts. They didn't say they were building something, but they were. The ranch grew stronger. Calves came tough and red with wide shoulders. Mercy branded them herself. The M mark sat just under the rib, sharp and permanent. She ran the books, counted feed, traded hides with the Apache runners who still passed through the hills. Cade taught her to ride alone. She learned not by sight but by rhythm. She called the horse sister and spoke to her in soft, stern tones. "Faster," she'd say. "Right, now left, don't lie to me." The mare listened. By spring, she could ride the ridge blindfolded and never miss a turn. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was commanding. It wasn't just love now. It was legacy. In the 5th year, Mercy buried Cade beside the sycamore he once split in a storm. He died quietly, seated in his chair with the sun on his face, a cup of chicory cooling in his hand. No pain, no fear, just breath and then no breath. She didn't cry. She washed his body herself, wrapped him in the same quilt he'd once said smelled of lavender and old church hymns. She carved the headstone with her own hands, slow and deliberate, each letter a cut that bled through wood and bone. She placed no cross, only the brand they'd made together, the M pressed into a flat slab of river stone. Men came offering to take the land after that. Some brought paper, some brought guns. One even brought a preacher, thinking a widow might sway easier with God in the room. Mercy met them all on the porch with her blade strapped to her hip and her fingers tapping the rail like a warning drum. She wore Cade's old coat now, the sleeves shortened to fit her frame. The knife had a new handle, carved from mesquite wood and blackened with oil. "You'll die tired before I give it to you," she told them. One laughed. He didn't laugh long. Word spread. They started calling it Widow's Ranch, not Cade's, not Lowry's, not the Elwood place either, just hers, the blind woman's land, the place no man could take. Even when winter came hard or cattle dropped from fever, she never left. She trained the neighbors' boys to mend fences, paid them with pelts and cured meat. She taught the preacher's daughter to shoot. The girl's hand trembled on the trigger, but Mercy held her wrist steady. "Don't pray for courage," she told her. "Just act like you already had it, and the rest will follow." People came to her now for more than trade. They came for stories, counsel, sometimes quiet. She never offered kindness easily, but she gave it when it mattered. She kept Cade's rifle above the hearth. Every Sunday, she read aloud from the book of Ruth to no one. Her voice low, steady, even after her sight faded to pure black. "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, your God, my God." Some nights she walked the pasture with only the sound of her boots and the creak of the windmill. She knew the land by smell and wind and memory. She could find the ridge by the soft bend of the earth beneath her soles, the grave by the warmth it still carried. On the 12th year, fire came again, not from the brush or the sun, but from men with torches, masked and bold. They thought age would weaken her. They thought blindness made her slow. They were wrong. She heard them an hour before they reached the main gate. The way the birds quieted, the pause between wind and motion, the smell of kerosene in the air. She didn't run. She lit her own lanterns and stood in the barn with a pistol in each hand, her back to the corral fence. When they breached the gate, she spoke first. "This land is marked," she said. "Blood for blood, fire for fire, you'll leave dead or humbled." They charged. She didn't miss. 3 dropped before the others even reached the barn wall. One fled screaming, half his face gone. Another fell to the blade she kept hidden under the feed trough. The last tried to beg. She shot him clean through the chest. In the morning, she fed the animals like nothing happened, tied her hair back with a new strip of cloth. The neighbors found the bodies stacked by the fence line, boots removed, hands crossed over their chests. No grave. Just warning. By then, Mercy's hair had gone pure white. She no longer moved fast, but she moved without fear. Her hands were calloused, her hearing sharp as iron. She still drank her coffee black, still sat with her back to the wall, still carved wooden spoons when she couldn't sleep. One spring, a child wandered onto her land, a girl with a bruised cheek and no shoes. Mercy gave her broth, washed her feet, and said nothing. The girl stayed. Later, more came. Drifters, runaways, women who'd lost too much and had nowhere left to be. Mercy gave them a cot, a knife, and a set of rules. Never lie. Never kneel. Never run unless you mean to win. They followed her like a storm follows thunder. She taught them to ride by feel, to shoot by sound, to work cattle and mend fences and know their own name by the weight of it. They called her Mother Mercy by then. She let them. When her time came, it came slow and quiet, just like Cade's. She died in her sleep with her hands folded over her chest and her knife beneath the pillow. The girl she'd taken in buried her beside the sycamore, beside Cade, beside the roots that had never broken. No preacher spoke. The women read from the book of Ruth in turn, each voice strong. She became myth not because she meant to, but because no one else ever did what she did and lived. Blind, abandoned, left to rot. And yet, she built a home with blood and grit. Loved without weakness. Fought without flinching. And in the end, she was not forgotten. She was followed. Not love. Not vengeance. Something greater. Something that stays.